The sun hung low and red over the county fairgrounds, where dust and voices tangled in the hot wind. Horses neighed, traders shouted, and somewhere in the crowd, a young girl stood trembling beside an old wagon. Her name was Lydia, 17 years old and still wearing the ribbon her mother had tied in her hair before she died. She didn't understand why her uncle had brought her here, but the fear in her chest told her it wasn't good. He was already drunk, the smell of whiskey thick on his breath as he barked to the men nearby. "Strong girl, knows her chores pure as they come. Who'll take her?" Laughter broke through the dust. Coins clinked. Someone whistled. Lydia's hands clenched around her skirt as her uncle yanked her forward by the arm. "Don't act shy now. You're fetching me a fair price today." From the corner of the crowd, a tall figure approached, a man in a weathered hat, his coat faded by sun and saddle. His name was Elias Ward, a cowboy past 30, with eyes as tired as the land he rode. He looked at Lydia, not the way the others did, but like a man seeing a storm he couldn't walk away from. "How much?" Elias asked, his voice steady. The uncle grinned, showing yellowed teeth. $100. "She's worth every cent," Lydia's breath caught. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear nothing else. Elias hesitated. He knew it was wrong, buying a human being, but he'd seen what men did to girls left behind in towns like this. Maybe this way she'd be safe. He pulled a wad of bills from his coat and tossed them to the uncle. "She goes with me. No trouble after that?" The man pocketed the money greedily, laughing as he untied Lydia's wrists. "Pleasure doing business." Elias stepped forward, offering his hand. Lydia didn't take it. She stared at the ground, her tears falling silently into the dirt. "You're safe now," he said quietly, unsure if it was true. The men in the crowd jeered as he led her away. "Bought himself a wife," someone called. "Old fool!" Another shouted, but Elias ignored them. He lifted Lydia onto his horse, her small frame stiff and shaking, and climbed up behind her. As they rode away, the fairground faded into the red horizon. The girl didn't look back, but Elias did. He saw her uncle counting his money by the wagon, laughing. And he made himself a silent promise. She may have been sold today, but she'll never be owned again. The trail stretched endlessly beneath the rising moon, silver light spilling across the prairie. Lydia sat rigid in front of Elias on his horse, her hands gripping the saddle horn, her body trembling each time the wind brushed against her bare arms. Neither spoke for miles. Only the soft rhythm of hooves and the occasional coyote cry filled the emptiness. Elias kept his eyes on the horizon, but his thoughts were far behind them. He'd seen cruelty before, men who called themselves kin but treated blood like burden. He'd bought her to save her from worse, but now that she was there, silent and fragile as glass, he wondered if she'd ever forgive him for it. At last, he broke the quiet. "You got a name, girl?" She hesitated before answering, her voice so faint it nearly vanished in the wind. "Lydia?" he nodded. "Pretty name." "Suits the hills," she didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed ahead, but her mind was back at the fairground, hearing the laughter, seeing her uncle's greedy hands. The shame burned deep, though she'd done nothing wrong. She'd been sold like livestock. How could she trust the man who'd paid for her freedom? They rode until the sky turned violet. Elias finally slowed his horse and pointed toward a distant ridge. "My ranch is just past there. Got a small cabin, quiet place. You'll rest tonight, have a hot meal. Ain't no one gonna touch you." Still, Lydia said nothing. When they reached the cabin, the air smelled of pine and smoke. Elias dismounted and helped her down gently, careful not to startle her. She flinched anyway. "Easy now," he said softly. "Ain't gonna hurt you." Inside, the cabin was humble. One room, a wood stove, a worn table, and a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. He poured her a tin cup of water and set it on the table before lighting the lantern. "Drink," he said, stepping back to give her space. Lydia obeyed, sipping cautiously. Her reflection shimmered in the water, pale, scared, and tired. "You'll sleep here," Elias continued, pointing to the bed. "I'll stay out in the barn. You got my word." Something in his tone, steady, sincere, made her look up for the first time. His eyes weren't cruel, just weary, honest. "Why'd you buy me?" she finally asked. Elias sighed, removing his hat. "Didn't buy you. I bought your freedom. There's a difference." Her lips parted, but she didn't know what to say. He nodded toward the door. Get some rest, Lydia. You're safe here. When he left, she sat alone in the flickering light, staring at the quilt. For the first time in years, she wasn't being watched, beaten, or bartered. Still, safety felt strange, like a dream she didn't dare believe. Outside, Elias leaned against the barn rail, looking up at the stars. The land was quiet again, but his heart wasn't. Somewhere between pity and duty, something heavier was stirring, something he didn't yet understand. Morning light spilled through the cabin window, warming the rough boards and catching in the curls of steam from the kettle on the stove. Lydia stirred awake beneath the patchwork quilt, her body stiff but her heart strangely still. For the first time in months, no one shouted at her to rise. No one grabbed her by the arm or threw a chore list at her. Elias was already outside, chopping wood. The steady rhythm of his axe echoed through the cool dawn air. Through the window she watched him, broad-shouldered, focused, his movements precise but patient. There was a calmness in him that the world seemed to have forgotten. When he came inside, the scent of fresh bread followed him. "Morning," he said simply, setting a loaf on the table. "You sleep all right?" She nodded faintly. "Yes, sir." "No need for sir," he said, pouring her coffee. "Just Elias will do." She hesitated before taking the cup. Her hands were still trembling from the memories of being sold, of the men's laughter, of her uncle's grin. Elias noticed, though he didn't mention it. He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "You don't owe me anything," he began. "Not work, not marriage, not a word you don't want to say. I brought you here so you'd be safe. What you do after that is up to you." Lydia stared at him, unsure how to process such kindness. "You could have left me there," she whispered. "Could have," he agreed, his eyes fixed on the fire. "But I've seen too many left behind." The words hung between them. After breakfast, Lydia stepped outside. The land stretched wide and gold under the sun. Rolling hills, grazing cattle, the scent of hay and sage. The air itself felt cleaner than she remembered air could be. She knelt to touch the grass, grounding herself in the earth. The wind, the light. Elias watched from the porch, arms crossed. He didn't speak. He simply let her be. By noon, she began helping without being asked, fetching water, brushing down the horses, sweeping the porch. The work soothed her, gave her purpose. Elias thanked her quietly each time, his respect steady and unassuming. Later that day, as the sun dipped low, Lydia gathered the courage to ask, "Why do you live out here alone?" He paused before answering. "Had a wife once," he said softly. She didn't take to the silence. "Went back east. Guess the land's too lonely for some." Lydia looked at him, realizing his quiet wasn't just peace, it was pain. That evening they shared supper under the dim lantern light. For the first time Lydia smiled, a small, fleeting thing. But Elias noticed. He gave a faint grin in return and said, "Told you the hills would suit your name." That night, Lydia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The fear was still there, but so was something new. Trust, fragile as spring grass. And though she didn't know it yet, that trust would soon be tested by the past she thought she'd escaped. The peace that Lydia found on the ranch didn't last long. By the end of the week, whispers had begun to drift through town. Rumors about the cowboy who bought himself a girl. Some said she was his bride. Others said she was his slave. Gossip in the frontier traveled faster than wildfire. And before long, it reached the man she feared most, her uncle. Drunk again and angry that he'd sold her too cheap. Late one afternoon, Elias noticed two riders approaching through the haze of heat. Dust swirled behind their horses as they drew closer. Lydia, hanging laundry by the corral, froze when she recognized the lead rider's hat. Her voice broke into a whisper. "It's him." Elias stepped off the porch, hand resting near his revolver. "You go inside, Lydia," he said calmly. "Lock the door." She obeyed, her heart hammering in her chest. Through the small window, she watched as the men dismounted. Her uncle's face was red from liquor and rage. "You think you can just take what's mine?" He spat, staggering forward. "She ain't yours," Elias replied evenly. "You sold her." "Cash and clear," the uncle sneered. "You think that makes her yours?" "She's a girl, not cattle." "You're no better than me." Elias's expression hardened. "Difference is I don't chain people to wagons." The man's companion, a tall, wiry drifter with a scar across his jaw, stepped closer, hand on his holster. "We can make this real simple, Cowboy. Give her back or we'll take her." Inside the cabin, Lydia pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, fighting tears. She could hear every word, every pause, every breath. Elias's voice came low and cold. "You take one more step toward that door, and I'll drop you before your boot hits the porch." The standoff stretched thin as wire. Then her uncle laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "You can't hide her forever, Ward. Folks'll talk. Sheriff'll come sniffing around. You'll lose everything trying to protect her." Elias said nothing. His silence was its own threat. Finally, the uncle spat into the dust and turned his horse. "You'll regret this," he muttered as they rode off, vanishing into the horizon. When Elias entered the cabin again, Lydia was still by the window, pale and shaking. "They won't stop," she whispered. "He never does." Elias removed his hat, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then we'll be ready next time." She looked up at him, tears gathering in her eyes. "Why are you risking everything for me?" He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because no one ever did the same for me when I needed it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sun bled out across the prairie, painting the land in crimson and gold. The danger hadn't passed. It had just begun. But Lydia felt something stronger than fear stirring inside her. For the first time, she believed she might be worth fighting for. The warning came 2 nights later. The wind had turned wild, whistling through the cracks in the barn walls, carrying the scent of smoke long before they saw the flames. Elias woke. First, his instincts sharpened by years alone on the land. He bolted upright, grabbed his rifle, and ran to the window. On the ridge beyond the pasture, orange light flickered against the dark. Then he heard it, the gallop of horses, fast and deliberate. "Lydia!" he shouted, bursting through her door. "Get your boots now!" She was already awake, fear wide in her eyes. "Is it them?" "Yeah," he said grimly, loading a shell. "They've come back." Before she could speak, gunfire cracked through the night. Bullets tore through the barn doors, splintering wood. The cattle bellowed in panic, hooves thundering. Elias returned fire, his shots echoing through the valley. Sparks flew as a lantern tipped inside the barn, and suddenly the dry hay ignited. Flames roared upward, painting the night in red. Lydia grabbed a bucket of water, but Elias pulled her back. "No, you'll get caught in it." Tears streaked her face as she pointed toward the stalls. "The mare's still inside. She's got a foal." "Damn it, Lydia." Elias started, but she was already running through the smoke. He cursed under his breath and followed. Inside, the heat was unbearable. The air was thick with ash and the terrified cries of trapped animals. Lydia threw open the stall door, coughing, her dress catching sparks. The foal was tangled in rope, its mother kicking wildly. Elias caught up, yanked off his coat, and smothered the small fires around her. "Hold the rope steady," he shouted. Together they freed the foal, guiding it toward the open door. Outside, gunshots rang again. The uncle's voice cut through the chaos. "Come out, Ward. You can't keep her." Elias led Lydia and the foal behind the corral fence. He aimed through the smoke and fired, one shot, clean and sharp. A cry followed, then silence. The second rider fled into the darkness. The wind shifted, fanning the flames toward the house. Elias threw his coat over Lydia's shoulders and pulled her close. "We've got to move. Now." They ran through the smoke and heat until the fire shrank to a distant glow. On the ridge, they stopped to catch their breath, the stars dim behind a veil of ash. Below them, the barn was collapsing, flames licking what remained of the roof. Lydia turned to him, voice trembling. "You killed him, didn't you?" Elias's jaw tightened. "I did what had to be done." The words hung heavy between them. Lydia's tears mixed with soot, but when she looked at him, she saw no cruelty, only exhaustion and sorrow. "He won't hurt you again," Elias said quietly. The prairie wind carried away the smell of smoke, leaving only silence. The fire had taken his barn, his horses, maybe his peace, but not his resolve. As dawn crept over the horizon, Elias made a vow he'd never spoken aloud. If the world was determined to break her, He'd stand in its way until his last breath. The morning sun rose pale and weary over the charred remains of the barn. Smoke, still curled from blackened timbers, drifting lazily into the wide, empty sky. Lydia stood near the fence, wrapped in Elias's old coat, her hair tangled, her face streaked with ash and tears. The foal she'd saved nuzzled against her side, searching for comfort. Elias approached quietly, his hat in his hands. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red from smoke and grief, but his steps were steady. "The sheriff's coming," he said softly. "Riders went out before dawn. They'll find whoever ran." Lydia didn't answer right away. She watched a lone hawk circle above the plains. "I never meant to bring trouble here," she murmured. "You lost everything because of me." Elias shook his head. "I lost a barn. Wood can be replaced. People can't." She looked up then, meeting his eyes. "You should hate me." "I don't," he said simply. "You didn't ask to be sold. You didn't ask to be hurt." He glanced toward the horizon where the smoke met the sky. "You just asked to live. And that's not a sin." The sheriff arrived not long after, riding hard with 2 deputies. They took the wounded man, the uncle, and confirmed what Elias already knew. The others hadn't made it far. Lydia's husband was gone, vanished into the desert. "You'll be safe now," the sheriff assured her. "You can stay with friends in town till this settles." But Lydia shook her head. "No, I'm not going back there." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "The town watched them sell me, watched them hurt me. I won't live among people who think that's right." Elias stepped forward. "She'll stay here," he said, "until she decides otherwise." The sheriff studied him, then nodded slowly. "You always did have a stubborn streak, Ward. Guess it's a good thing this time." He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving them alone in the rising light. For a long while, neither spoke. Lydia knelt beside the foal, running her hand over its soft neck. "I thought my life ended the day they sold me," she whispered. "But last night, when the fire burned, it felt like something else was ending instead. The fear, maybe." Elias crouched beside her. "Fear don't die easy," he said, "but it fades little by little." She smiled faintly. "Will you teach me to ride? Properly this time?" He chuckled, the sound rough but warm. "I reckon I can manage that." The wind picked up, stirring the ash into silver swirls that danced in the sunlight. The prairie stretched before them, empty, endless, and full of promise. Elias stood, extending his hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's start over." Lydia took his hand without hesitation. Together they walked toward the corral, past the ruins of what had burned, toward the open fields that waited beyond. Behind them, the fire's smoke rose one last time, then disappeared into the morning sky, leaving only blue. And though the world would still whisper and judge, on that quiet stretch of prairie, a girl once sold and a man once lonely began something neither of them had ever truly known before, a life chosen freely.